Hello and welcome to the Leaders Council podcast with me, Joshua Jackson. This podcast, just like the Leaders Council itself, is all about recognizing and celebrating the people who keep this great country running. We exist to give leaders a voice outside of their own organizations and to support them in the same way that they support their staff every single day of the week. If you're in a leadership position yourself and would like to have your voice heard on the national stage, please go to leaderscouncil.co.uk/apply. Each week on this program, I'm joined by a different leadership figure from the world of business, education, politics, sports, or even from local communities, in the aim of truly discovering who those people are that get up every morning and make this country work. We get their take on the current economic and political landscape of the UK and discuss everything from international relations and global treaties to national insurance price hikes, and of course the success and the innovation that makes it all worthwhile in the end. On today's program, I'm delighted to be joined by James Fisher, Chief Product Officer at Qlik. And without further ado, James, welcome onto the show.
Good morning. How are you?
Thank you for taking the time to appear today. I know it's a busy schedule you've got, but just so that we can sort of introduce everybody to you and to Qlik, can you just let us all know, who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. So as you said, I'm the Chief Product Officer here at Qlik. My role is to support our innovation and product strategy and really ensuring that we're delivering solutions that meet the needs of our global customer base. And actually that's all about helping our customers work with data and derive insights from data that creates value for their organization. So we provide a set of technologies that help organizations take raw data and make that analytics ready, moving it to where it will provide value, and creating then the set of tools and capabilities that allow individuals, teams, and organizations as a whole to find those hidden insights that help them do things differently and compete better in the market and really drive more business and organizational value for themselves.
Well, obviously, data is something that everybody always talks about, everybody wants, but people don't tend to know sometimes what the sort of main drivers are to get the most out of what they're looking at. And I'm sure we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail as we get further through. But, it's almost impossible to ignore at the moment the challenges posed by COVID, by business interruption, by worldwide economic slumps and in and out lockdowns across the world. And, it's just give us an idea of how you've coped with that. Has there been any major changes, or has it been sort of relatively smooth sailing for you?
Well, I think like everybody, back in February and March of 2020, there was a huge degree of uncertainty for us as an organization and us as individuals. All of our lives changed overnight. I put my passport away and haven't been near an airport since. But as an organization, we've built an incredibly resilient business that is highly responsive to our customers and our global ecosystem of partners. And that allowed us to really watch what was happening within the market and respond accordingly. So like many organizations, we moved directly into a hybrid working model, and are highly adapted to that given the infrastructure and the capabilities that we have. But of course, we're in the business of data and analytics, and very quickly we saw the armchair epidemiologist became a word that is forefront in all of our vocabulary. I suspect it probably wasn't previously. And really what we saw happen at that point was that organizations around the world really focused in on the need to understand what was happening, to be able to react and pre-act to all this uncertainty that COVID-19 brought into all of our lives. And that really drove a big continued growth in investment in analytic and data technologies, but also a change in the way people are looking to consume data and analytics. The shift to cloud had been something that had been prevalent in this and all enterprise software businesses for a long time. But as a result of COVID, that has dramatically accelerated. And that And that is a great opportunity for Qlik and a great opportunity for us to work with our customers.
That is true. The having people to take a step back, not panic and actually assess what's been going on within their business and how they can adapt to it has really been accelerated here. Actually understanding what their business was, how they needed to still engage with their customers, and understanding what their customers or their partners needed from them has been an incredibly important change that I think a lot of people were unprepared for. So when it comes to yourselves and understanding data and working with your partners, what do you actually mean when you say that people need to have a sort of insight-driven culture?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that's really interesting is you think back over the last 10, 15, maybe even 20 years where, the growth in management information systems, business intelligence systems, now, predictive AI, machine learning technologies, the evolution of the technology, the amount of data, the complexity of data that exists has always continued to change. But what's really interesting is that despite all of the years of investment that technology companies like Qlik have made and end user organizations have made, we're still really not getting the results that I would suspect most business executives would jump up and down about. Just some data that we've been pulling together and working with a range of analysts sort of indicates that less than half of organizations really feel they have enough data for making decisions. Less than a third of executives feel they can achieve the sort of transformational business outcome as a result of using data that they should be looking for. And data literacy is a major roadblock in terms of individuals being able to work with data. So if you think about all of those statistics there's an opportunity to do a lot better. But with all of these things, it's not just about the technology, it's not just about the business process, it's not just about the people, it's about a combination of all of those things. So this idea of an insight, a data-driven culture is really about ensuring that we think about how we're making decisions, how we're taking action, and how data can help us inform that. And a critical component around that is how individuals trust the data. We often look outside our windows in the morning and we look and see what's happening with the weather. We also look at our mobile phones and look at weather apps and talk about what's going on with the weather. And you tend to look at that app and it's in effect an analytic. It's about big data. It's about forward-looking information. It's multidimensional in nature. It's an analytic with a very simplified UI so that you and I can understand what's going on. But here I am in southwest London, and if it was to tell me it would be 40 degrees today, I'd probably challenge that because I know I've got context that's not really normal for where I live. I'd also look out the window and validate it and see grey skies above me and say, well, it's not really going to be 40 degrees today. So it's about that ability to challenge, to understand, to know how to apply data, and then to trust it, to take the action that really is where we create value. And that's this notion of a insight-driven culture. It's much more than just the technology and the business process. It's about how we enable people to work within that environment and use it to their advantage.
And, that's one of the things that leaders of organizations really struggle with. A lot of the time, people become entrepreneurs or rise up the ranks within their organization through gut feeling, through knowing what the right decision is, through trusting their instincts. And it can be very difficult to actually rely on numbers that are being provided to you. So what would be your number one tip to leaders when they're looking at numbers in front of them and it disagrees with their inner feeling of what they think the direction ought to be?
Well, I think there's a couple of points that are important here. I mean, first of all, with that weather example, right? I've got 40 years of looking out the window, seeing the weather, right? It's a lot of experience. And individuals that have built careers, have got rich domain expertise, they're experts in their field, have a level of understanding that allows them to critique and challenge data. So that notion of knowledge to a degree, the gut feel, if you describe it as that, that's a really important part of the analytical process, right? That ability to natively use what we as individuals, really, that human intuition, right, is a really critical component of everything that we do. It's how we ask questions and then how we ask the next question. So that notion is really, really important. But there's also the component around making sure that you have all the information such that you can trust the data that is made available to you. So knowing when to challenge it, knowing where the data came from. I mean, I suspect many of your listeners have been in those meetings where you spend more time arguing about, well, is that the right number, or where did that number come from? How did you calculate that metric? Or, well, actually, is that this week's number or is that last week's number? All of those types of things, sort of get in the way of the real question of what is happening and what should we do about it. So not only do you need to bring that human intuition, that business knowledge to the data itself, but it's also important that as organizations and executives we drive our teams to make sure that we've got a good understanding of where the data came from. That doesn't mean that a single version of the truth is always the answer. In fact, it's in many cases it's an unattainable goal. But understanding and how you work across multiple versions of the truth, where a data point came from, ensuring that everybody is looking at the same data point, sort of brings those two worlds together. So again, classic combination of making sure that the technology supports the delivery of trusted analytics and business-ready data. Context is worth 80 IQ points after all. And then combine that with the knowledge, and I think you've got a winning combination.
So, at Qlik, how would you potentially help people to get, insight from the numbers that they're looking at to help with their process of decision making?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that we're working on and are part of our kind of innovation strategy, and they really span two different components. One around the technology, and one around this notion of data literacy, which is critically important. From a technology perspective, our vision is all about enabling an analytic data pipeline that takes raw data from wherever it resides, makes it analytics ready, which means it's structured in the right way, but then gives you that business context, right? That has a language, a glossary, a lineage around that data that gives you that foundation of trust. On top of that, we're now in a unique position to leverage AI, machine learning, cognitive technologies to help users of any level, of any skill level or executive level within an organization, right the way down to an operational worker, to gain an insight, to ask a question in natural language, which previously would have been, all about looking at a very complex spreadsheet or even a very complex dashboard. But there are now so many different ways we can deliver data and insights that stop the analytic being the destination and actually put that information into the hands of executive business knowledge and operational workers wherever they are, they're working on, whatever device they're working on. And then more importantly, being able to trigger the action out of that insight in a highly collaborative way. So the technology supports that pipeline of data and really enables us to get to what I call active intelligence, this idea that we have access to as much real-time information as we need, but also having the ability to not just inform, but trigger the action out of it. On the data literacy side, sorry, please.
No, carry on.
No, on the data literacy side, it's really about enabling the skill of users within the organization. And this absolutely is not about how you use a piece of technology. It's not about how you use Qlik products or any other analytic product for that matter. It's about understanding how you need to read, work, argue with data, how you need to tell a story with data, how you can interpret it, what is the right way to represent data to answer a question. And that's a whole set of skills that need to be applied at different levels across the organization. And we've made a huge investment alongside our ecosystem of partners in things like the Data Literacy Project to ensure that we can help organizations, help individuals get the right level of data literacy that will help them be successful in their job.
Well, I think one of the things that a lot of people, worry about when it comes to data, and as you've mentioned, sort of AI learning, machine learning, it's that this is something for multinational organizations, large organizations that have a lot of money to spend and to put these processes in place. But if you're a sort of budding entrepreneur and you've got a small business that you're looking to expand, how would you use, let's say, your insights to help a smaller organization rather than somebody that has offices all over the world?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, we're in an age now where access to data, is ubiquitous. We're in an age now where, the ability to analyze that data, is a very democratized process. So yes, if you're a huge organization and have, teams of hundreds of data scientists, that gives you a set of skills and an opportunity to do things that perhaps a smaller organization shouldn't. But absolutely, whether we're students, still learning our trade, whether we're new into employment, whether we're entrepreneurs working in small teams, the ability to ask a question of data is something that is accessible to everybody. And again, the application of AI and machine learning, if done in the right way, doesn't require a huge amount of heavy lifting. As just a great example of that, the role of conversational analytics, the ability to, ask a question of the data rather than having to build an application or build a dashboard, is a baseline feature of our own cloud product that, any individual can go and sign up for a trial today or go and, buy an individual user license for it and away they go. So we're in a world of democratization of data and analytics, and again, I think, Joshua, that's one of the reasons why this notion of data literacy is so important, because I think that we've grown up with this idea that there should be a big team of people, a big infrastructure of people that are producing all these analytics and dashboards and sending them out to us, all these reports we need to go and look at, and that's really not how we can best capture the opportunity. It's much more accessible than that.
I think that's really positive for people to hear that, through the right amount of education in yourself, that you don't need a huge team to be, as you say, pulling reports and potentially bloating, the data that's coming through the analytics and the decision-making processes. So I think that's, a great thing for small sort of leaders or small business leaders to be hearing that these things can be done, at small scale rather than just for the big boys out there. So James, if we're looking for business leaders to be able to engage a little bit more, do you have any sort of advice for people on how to actually improve themselves, read the data, and engage more with their organization?
Yeah, it's a great question, and ultimately, trying to eat the elephant in one sitting is probably not going to be the right way to approach it. So I'd simply say three things. First of all, set clear data expectations. What do you want to achieve? What are the goals? And be realistic about what they are. Use that as an opportunity to deliver a success and build value. Once you've defined those goals, then map out the roadmap to achieve them. What steps need to be taken? In what order do you want to go about knocking those things down? And perhaps most critically, is give your team members the right tools to be successful. And that is about the technology. It's about the processes. But as we talk a lot about, it's also about making sure there is the right training, the investment in people, not just in the technology itself, but actually how they need to work with data.
That's a really interesting point. Making sure that the people that you're working with are able to adapt and learn alongside. And I'm sure something that people will take note of and hopefully implement within their own organisations. But if we're sort of looking ahead, a bit to the future now, what do you think the upcoming trends are going to be? Will there be major changes in the space, or do you think that things are going to be relatively settled from here on in?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and we're always looking at what's going to be coming next as part of my and my team's role ultimately. And I think that as we move through the pandemic, and I have a bit of a pet peeve with this notion of post pandemic, because I think we're still figuring out what's going on. There's still huge issues around the world with what's going on. But as we bring things together, as we start to think about how we're going to continue, or how we're going to work and live in this environment moving forward, how we're going to deal with the sort of level of uncertainty which is going to be normal now, we're moving to a world of much more connectiveness, where everything is going to become much more interwoven. So that ability to innovate with data, the ability to see across multiple silos with data is going to be critically important. We're going to continue to see an acceleration in terms of the movement of data and analytics infrastructures into the cloud, into software as a service environments. We're going to continue to see a growth in the application of AI and machine learning around those capabilities. But at the same time, we have got to address this issue of data literacy in the workplace and in education, because as that drive to make use and differentiate and compete and innovate with data moves forward, the workforce has got to keep pace with that. And I think we're a little bit out of balance right now. So I think we've got to do much more around that learning component with data, empowering people to work with data in order to take advantage of that opportunity that I think really exists.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Making sure that people do grow up with the education there, to be able to actually, work within the more technological world. But the world is also becoming a more fractured place. Especially when it comes to now the internets. There are now technically three internets: the European and American, the Russian, the Chinese, and that's going to make things looking very difficult for sort of cross-platform work. What data is allowed to be sort of gathered, and it's becoming a very sort of hot political topic. So I can imagine there's going to be plenty of sort of policy changes within the space, rather than potentially sort of just the technology and the literacy carrying catching up, as you say. But yourself as sort of chief products officer, what have you got coming through the pipeline at Qlik? Is there anything you've got coming up that's innovative or going to be breaking boundaries, or is it just sort of consolidating the current product range?
Well, no, I mean, never stop innovating, right? I mean, so look, you're absolutely. I just want to pick up actually the point you made earlier. The governance and compliance around data, is a really important topic, and one that we absolutely shouldn't forget. It's a key component of how, as individuals, we trust data, and data literacy itself is also about our understanding of how we protect data, either our own personal data or organizational data. That's a key part of this skill set that we need to understand as alongside the how do we work and manipulate that data so we can get the insights that we want. To that point, actually, this issue of sort of multi-geography, multiple compliance legislations is really, I think, going to continue to persist an idea of hybrid infrastructure in the world of data and analytics. That ability to work with data across multiple jurisdictions, whether it's on-premise, in public or private cloud, and the ability to ultimately work with data wherever it resides and run the compute on the analytics wherever it resides. And that in itself is one of the big things that we're working on right now, making sure that we can support what we regard as our customers' data needs, so that we will support analytic use cases that get the best of cloud environments in terms of speed of adoption, delivery of innovation, performance, scale, and cost of ownership, but at the same time give the ability to work with the customer's data wherever that resides, both in terms of the physical location of the data and where the analytical compute resides. So we're working on that right now, some really exciting stuff coming there. And then beyond that, our focus is very much around how we help organizations drive adoption and use of data, whether that's an individual, a small team, or a large enterprise. And that starts with what we're doing around the catalog, making sure that data is easily searchable, findable, the lineage of it is understood, it's trusted, so that people want to work with that data. And then it's about finding and generating those insights, being able to apply AI and machine learning to those problems, but then draw people into the process through collaboration, through alerting, and some really exciting stuff we'll be announcing very soon around the automation. So not just informing, but actually triggering the action, pushing that action to wherever the individual is. And that's all about driving engagement, driving adoption, and lowering the overall cost of ownership while speeding time to value for customers. So lots of really exciting stuff coming from Qlik on that front.
Well, it sounds like you've got a busy few months ahead, being able to adapt to all of these things. But, it'd be absolutely fantastic to sort of have you back on the show after some of these projects have come forward. So you can give us a bit more insight into, how they've been received, dealing again with the sort of politics of the space as well. As there's going to be an awful lot of change over the next few months, given the treaties that have just been signed this week and 17th of September for anybody listening. James, I just want to thank you ever so much for coming on and giving us a bit more insight into what people can do to sort of improve their capacity to deal with numbers, with data, with analytics.
Excellent. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, Joshua. Thank you very much.
Thank you ever so much. That was James Fisher, Chief Product Officer at Qlik. A really great conversation looking at an area which is very daunting for many business leaders to get to grips with and to actually understand, what the data is telling them and how to actually analyze the numbers that are coming through. Very much an important aspect at the moment to be able to put businesses forwards into the new world. But next up on the show, we have Lord David Blunkett, Chairman of the Leaders' Council, and he'll be talking about the political chaos of the last 18 months and his expectations for the future.
Lord Blunkett, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's very good to be with you.
Well, of course, nothing is being said at the moment other than COVID-19, which we must touch on. What would your message be to small businesses who are trying to keep going?
Well, I think the last ones standing will be the ones that thrive when we get back to some sort of normality. So it's have confidence and courage. Obviously, take advantage as far as you can of the government help. I think that Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, has gone about as far as you could have expected. Mm-hmm. In the circumstances. There are obviously small businesses that fall between the cracks. Those who don't have defined premises, can't benefit from the business rate waiver, have not really been able to demonstrate that they can adhere to the PAYE for furloughing staff, and of course whether they can receive the grant, 10,000 or 25,000. All of those who can are obviously able at least to benefit from that for the time being and look to the future. But I think the second thing to say, and they don't need me to tell them this as a politician who did once do a business studies qualification, which is that it will be a different world, and being able to think about how that world will look in a year's time and be creative about it and learn from not just what's happening to you at this moment in time, but to others around you and the sector that you're working in, that will be really important.
Do you feel that the long-term effects of the COVID-19 outbreak will in some ways be positive for British industry?
Well, only in the sense that people are having to be creative, they're having to adjust and innovate. Therefore, they're thinking about more productive, if you like, greater productivity ways of delivering the same service or delivering the same products. And in that sense, I think we'll have temporarily at least very much higher unemployment than we've become used to, but we'll probably have a burst of productivity, which will help with the recovery. Whether it will help with the inequity of the way in which our economy is imbalanced, both between services and productivity and the production of goods and services, I'm not sure. What we will need to try and do is to ensure that the geographic imbalance that exists is, as far as humanly possible, is dealt with by both the entrepreneurship and innovation from the bottom up and targeted government help, which will still be needed. And we are now in the throes of the kind of borrowing that we saw back in 2008 to save the banking and economic system. We're having to do that to save the whole of our productive business and commerce, and I think that will have to be sustained for some time.
Do you feel that people will take a second look at global supply chains in the wake of this outbreak?
I think there's going to be much more creative ways of using local supply and linking up inside sectors much more effectively. And I hope that the Leaders' Council will be able to play a part in that, in the sense that people who have something in common, a synergy in terms of what they're delivering, whether it's a service or whether it's manufacturing or whatever, will be able to see that there's a good outcome from knowing the sector better, linking with people, not just geographically, locally, but those in this country who may not have been on the radar in terms of what they produced for the supply chain. And of course, ensuring, because there's quite a lot of fraud going on as we speak with people getting into cyber attacks, that they'll also take account of going into the cybersecurity side effectively as well. The more we are online, the more people who are working from home, the more vulnerable those businesses and their supply chain become. And that's something to think about as well.
How important is strong leadership at the moment?
Well, I actually think that it's brought to the fore leadership in a whole range of areas, from obviously government itself, and there's been ups and downs with the Prime Minister's severe illness, but all the way through the public and private sector, people have, to use the jargon, stepped up, and they've shown local, regional, and national level the kind of leadership that Britain historically was very good at. Regrettably, we've not seen the same on the international scene for all kinds of reasons, but maybe we will in future. So I think out of this will come experience of people who have seen an opportunity to do good, as well as seen an opportunity to provide a good service or goods, including, for instance, shortages for the health and social care system, the food chain and the like, but also I think in terms of seeing the synergy between the private and the voluntary sector and using people's commitment to each other in a very positive way. I'm not sentimental about this. Things will revert. But actually, I think there's a kind of moment of moral judgment of people feeling that they've got a role to play outside the immediate survival that they're engaged in. And if we can hang on to a little bit of that social responsibility, that will be a very positive outcome.
Absolutely. Now, what's your broad view of how the government is responding to this? Are you broadly supportive of their measures?
Well, it may surprise people to hear that I have been very supportive. Of course, there's been legitimate criticisms about the speed of response on protective equipment and on issues relating to testing. But my own view is very similar to the challenge that was made to the Prime Minister of Italy when people said, why didn't you close Italy down faster? And he said, a fortnight before we did it, I would have been considered to be a madman and nobody would have agreed to do it if I'd tried to move too quickly. And I think that's something that we need to reflect on here in the UK. We may have seen the signals elsewhere across the world and taken them more seriously at the time. Hindsight is a wonderful thing, but as someone who's had his life in the opposite political party to the present government, I think that with some hiccups and mistakes, they've not done a bad job in what has been incredibly difficult circumstances.
And you're absolutely right. In a liberal democracy that we live in, it's very difficult for people to swallow orders given to them from government.
Well, the UK and the US, and to some extent the Scandinavian countries, have a very different history and therefore interest in maintaining the freedom to decide and the persuasion and consent that's required, those countries that have experienced one way or another totalitarianism over the last century have a slightly different way of coming at this. I don't want to exaggerate it, but I think that that's why getting the balance right of getting people to go along with what you want them to do in their interests as well as the nation as a whole is a sensible, proportional balance. And I think we now need to adjust to the coming out of the crisis gradually, readjusting to recovery in the same way.
Now, something you've mentioned recently on this balance is the police overreach in the enforcement of the COVID-19 structures that have been put in place. What have they done right, and where have they gone too far?
Well, I think that they were interpreting what was not necessarily as clear advice as it might have been for all kinds of reasons, because people were feeling their way. I think what's come out of it has been a demonstration by local police services in some parts of the country that they could get people to do what was needed without the heavy hand of drones overhead or people being told that they shouldn't be walking in the street, because this was all about self-isolation, not incarceration. It was about getting people not to pass the infection on to each other and therefore to provide distance rather than to make our lives a misery. Those police services that adopted that policing by consent and chivying people along did really well. Those who went over the top, I think, soon got a very substantial pushback. And one of the strengths of our democracy is that you could have that debate. People could say, I'm terribly sorry, we think the police force in our area has gone over the top. And that in itself is a constraint and a readjustment. That's another strength of living in a country where you can have opinions and express them without actually being thought to be a fool.
Now, of course, the government has faced criticism that they were slow to react, and Boris Johnson wasn't present at the early COVID-19 COBRA meetings. Now, Number 10 has claimed that this is normal practice. The health secretary often chairs COBRA meetings related to health. Does this tally with your experience as a Secretary of State, or would you have expected the PM to be more hands-on during the initial stages?
I think different prime ministers do have a very different style. And Boris's style, which I think will now be considerably adjusted, was very swashbuckling. In some senses, delegating is a good thing, as every leader of every business or public service knows. Those who try to pull too much into themselves end up with a massive bottleneck, great failure of trust, and the inability of people to show what they're worth and to demonstrate their capability. So I'd be very wary of jumping in and saying he was wrong to delegate the essential COBRA meetings. What I was surprised about was that he didn't chair the first couple, because my experience with Tony Blair for the 8 years I was in cabinet was that Tony was a great delegator, but he would get a grip to begin with, watch what the difficulties were, and then give people direction and confidence to be able to get on with it. So looking back, I think Boris himself probably thinks, God, I wish I'd spotted the signals from elsewhere in the world more rapidly, and I'd just been there. However, this also raises another issue. All of us in positions of leadership need good teams around us. I think after this is over, he will be assessing those who really did step up and those who demonstrated their inadequacy. I think we'll probably end up in a year's time with a much stronger cabinet than we have today.
Well, absolutely. And of course, we've seen a significant drop in the visibility of certain special advisors like Dominic Cummings during this entire period. So it'd be interesting to see how that pans out.
It's certainly readjusted the role of those behind the scenes with those who should be taking the decisions, having received advice. Obviously, there's been a complete transformation in the profile of experts, if I might use that term, who'd previously been denigrated. Scientists, medics, people with behavioral science understanding. My only criticism was, were we getting wide enough advice? Were we narrowing it too much to a couple of key centres in London? But that's because I've always been adverse to everything being London-centric. I think there's great expertise, wisdom, experience out in the sticks, and we should use it.
Rightly so. Now, was pandemic planning part of your time as a minister, particularly perhaps when you were Home Secretary?
Well, it was, but it was on the back of risk arising out of counter-terrorism measures.
Right.
I was the Home Secretary for 3 months when the attack took place in September 2001 on the World Trade Center and beyond. We did an enormous amount of scenario planning, both desktop and real. On the back of that, it was very heavily orientated to future developing terrorism risk. I certainly got involved with talking about pandemics. I remember being at a seminar in Edinburgh where the university there had done a lot of work itself on the issue of pandemics. And of course, we saw SARS and other things emerging. I think people criticized the government for not picking up the report from 2015, 5 years ago. I think that what happens is human nature kicks in. You deal with what you're immediately faced with. You can sponsor reports, and this is true of business planning, of course, as well, and scenario planning for what business continuity will look like, recovery plans for business, what will happen if there's a cyber attack, what happens if there's an energy shutdown. These kind of things you can look at, but you're immediately turning your eyes to what's in front of you. And had we picked up a bit more on the danger from Ebola and SARS and what have you in the past, then we might have said, what if something hits us in the developed nations that we don't have a vaccine for, that we can't immediately whisk up protective materials or equipment, or for that matter, medicines that help with recovery, all of which we now see are a danger. I think this will make an enormous difference to the planning for the years ahead. I hope it will be widened so that we don't just look at what's happened, because very rarely do you see something exactly repeat itself. Some of the circumstances will be, but others won't. So that's why I've put emphasis in what I talk about on looking at the other virus, the cyber attack scenario, which could be just as dangerous in a world of just-in-time provision. One of the miracles of the modern developed world, except for the very poor, has been the distribution of food. A lot of it on computerized, technologically advanced systems. If that were to come down, we'd be in real trouble. So I think we need to think those sort of scenarios as well.
So have a full plan across both sectors, biological warfare, pandemics, and cyber warfare.
Yes, and to do so on different levels. I think, again, thinking global but acting local, we need a lot more to think about what would happen if something took shape that actually broke down those national and global chains and how we would cope. And without, obviously, we've got enough fear and anxiety to last a lifetime. Without creating even more anxiety, we can think about those things for the future in a more rational way, I think.
Now, aside from the physical threat of the virus, one of the things that people are vastly worried about is the effect on the economy, not just national economy, but also the world economy. Now, it has been said by certain parties, and I'd like to garner your thoughts on this. Is there a danger of the effects of the lockdown being even worse than those of the virus?
Were it be prolonged, I fear that balance would tip the other way. It is about proportionality. It is about balance. It's the wisdom of Solomon, really, to get the moment right when you start to move and then to move quickly. There's no doubt whatsoever that we are stocking up, not just on the economic and employment front, which will be devastating enough, but on the health and social well-being front, enormous challenges, and they will need careful handling because there's a lot of people whose lives, for a variety of reasons, are at risk in the future on a scale that we've been dealing with over the immediate handling of the pandemic, concentrating really hard on those affected by COVID-19, those sadly who have died or been seriously incapacitated. That will roll over into the economic, the social, the mental health and cultural well-being of the nation, and that will need all of us to pull together as well.
Absolutely. Now, do you believe the government's doing enough for business?
I think that the speed of reaction once the scale of the pandemic was clear was very good. I've praised Rishi Sunak for his action. Remember, a chancellor who only just come into office was planning to deliver the budget in the middle of March and has had at least three equivalent budgets since. I think he's handled it very well. Understandably worried now about what we're doing to our economy. The level of borrowing is sustainable because of low interest rates, but it reaches a point, of course, where it tips over so that you can't then do the kind of structural investment requirements that the government were laying out before and in the March budget. And those will have their consequences as well as a planned payback over many years. I think we've learned something over the last few months. We needed to take immediate action. We don't want another round of austerity equivalent from 2010 through to 2019. I don't think the nation, on the back of what's happened and the challenges we have, could take that. And therefore, we need a different plan, economic plan, over a much longer period, just as we did from the Second World War all the way through to 2002, when the final American loans were paid off.
Now, of course, one thing that's on everyone's lips, how much longer do you believe that the lockdown can go on for?
I believe that we need to be substantially back in action as an economy in June. This obviously is led in terms of places where people would meet in large numbers, having to adjust to the fact that it will be longer for them. And sadly, that will involve business closures. It's why the Chancellor extended the furlough scheme to the end of June. Mm-hmm. But unless we get things moving in June, I think we'll run into the summer where all kinds of services and industries will have a chain reaction effect. And what happens with one will then have a major impact on another. And then you get the skittle effect where things get knocked down that you hadn't perceived were going to be affected. So I very much, if I were in government, and I always think of things in that context, what would I do if I were in government? I would be on the side from the second week in May, on the side of the hawks in terms of saying we've got to start moving, and we've got to do so with the collaboration and cooperation of the public who have got the message, who did behave, who responded magnificently. Let's try and get back, perhaps, doing things differently for a time, but substantially getting back to business as usual. And unless we do that, then those areas that can't and wouldn't expect to be back in action immediately get pushed further into the middle of the year and the autumn, and then they become unsustainable.
Now, of course, one of the other major developments we've had recently are the changes in the Labour Party. So if we could just speak on the Labour Party for a while. This might sound like an obvious question, but how does Secure differ from Mr. Corbyn?
Well, I'm biased because I believe the Labour Party has come out of 4.5 years of a black hole of a nightmare, where it neither represented a credible opposition nor an electable government, and the combination was to let those who supported the Labour Party and needed some of its policies let them down very badly. Sir Keir Starmer both is a highly intelligent, professional lawyer who, as Director of Public Prosecutions, led the service well, had to take difficult decisions at a time of austerity, understands the world beyond Labour members, but has been able to do business with those who originally supported Jeremy Corbyn and was able to command support from them. His creation of a balanced shadow ministerial team has been very encouraging. I supported Lisa Nandy, who he's made Shadow Foreign Secretary, because I thought she understood the north of England and the disaffected former Labour voters. But I believe that Sir Keir has taken on board those who have something really sensible to offer. And I believe he will be both a great leader of the opposition. More importantly, he will then present himself as a credible alternative prime minister. And all governments need an alternative government at their shoulder. It was true of us from 97, and it took the Conservatives some time to recover and to get to that position, but they did, and the Labour Party will, and that's crucial for our democracy. All of us need to understand and appreciate that a living, breathing, functioning democracy requires a credible, confident, and in many ways supportable opposition, as well as a government that we clearly want to do well, because none of us want, as we didn't with the COVID crisis, none of us want the government to fail. We want to see our economy recover. We want our social well-being to be taken into account. We want to overcome deep-seated inequality and poverty, and we want to do it with enterprise and entrepreneurship and business playing their role, and that is about leadership nationally, locally, in the private and the public sector, people with ideas, with confidence, with the ability to pull teams around them, above all, to have some idea of what it is they want to achieve and a very good idea as to how to achieve it.
Now, of course, one of the biggest problems Sir Keir is facing will be tackling the party's anti-Semitism problem. There has been a recent internal report that has been quite damning. What's your response to that report, and what does Sir Keir need to do in response? Well,
there are two reports. One which is being produced by the Equality and Human Rights Commission, which he will, and has already indicated, will implement in full. The second was a leaked report put together by the supporters of Jeremy Corbyn, 800 pages of private interchanges on social media, which he has, Keir Starmer, has set up an investigation to identify who did it, who leaked it, what the content was, does it have any salience and lessons for us, and where necessary, action will be taken. So I hope that as he moved very quickly to reassure the Jewish community, so he will be able to take the necessary steps to back up that reassurance with the kind of actions that says that this was a blight on a historic, great political party that all of us were ashamed of. We've been able to put that behind us and to move on to facing the future with confidence.
What's the one key thing that Sir Keir needs to do to restore Labour as an election-winning party?
I think Sir Keir Starmer's major challenge is to convince sceptical voters that Labour has not only reverted to a party that they can support because they can see it acting, developing, presenting as a credible alternative government, but also that the lessons have been learned from the fiasco from 2015 onwards. In other words, there have to be very clear signals of substantial change, not just the right words, not just reassurance that we're not going back to some of the crazier policies, but actually that we've understood why the electorate rejected those policies so substantially in December 2019. If people get that message, they'll understand that the Labour Party has changed, as it did in the 1980s and early 90s, to become the electable government with the greatest majority in historic majority, even greater than 1945, which I was privileged to be able to take advantage of in 1997 when I joined the cabinet.
Now, I know what your answer is going to be to this question, but indulge me. Do you think Sir Keir has what it takes to be PM?
Yes, I do. I think he has the background, he has the experience, he has the professionalism, he has the forensic mindset, and he has the confidence to have put a team around him which will ensure that it will work. And those elements are true of all leaders. Ideas, the ability to build a team, to have confidence in that team, and to be able to demonstrate leadership in practice, sometimes at the most difficult times. And, the Leaders' Council, those sharing their thoughts with the kind of thing that we're doing now with a podcast, but also joining us in linking up in that network of people who can support and help each other and learn from each other. That is what needs to be done in politics as it needs to be done in business. Thank you very much indeed, Matthew.
Well, thank you for coming on the program. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to speaking with you again.
Thank you very much, and good luck to all those listening in what has been a nightmare scenario. Good luck for the future. Have courage, have confidence, and yes, listen to those who know more about business than I ever will.
Thank you, Lord Blunkett.
Thank you.